A site, region on protein synthesis machinery that holds the tRNA carrying the next amino acid. Abiotic components, the non-living players in an ecosystem, such as climate and nutrients. Abscisic acid, plant hormone that inhibits cell growth, prevents premature germination, and stimulates closing of the stomata. Achondroplasia, autosomal dominant form of dwarfism seen in 1 out of 10,000 people. ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone, active site, part of the enzyme that interacts with the substrate in an enzyme-substrate complex. Adaptive radiation, a rapid series of speciation events that occur when one or more ancestral species invades a new environment. ADH, antidiuretic hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH, a hormone that stimulates the secretion of adrenal cortical hormones, which work to maintain electrolytic homeostasis in the body. Aerobic respiration, energy-producing reactions in animals that involve 3 stages: glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and oxidative phosphorylation. Requires oxygen. Age structure, statistic that compares the relative number of individuals in the population from each age group. Agonistic behavior, behavior that results from a conflict of interest between individuals, often involves intimidation and submission. Alcohol fermentation, occurs in fungi, yeast, and bacteria. Pyruvate is converted in 2 steps to ethanol, regenerating 2 molecules of NAD. Alcohol, organic compound that contains a hydroxyl O functional group. Aldehyde, carbonyl group in which one R is a hydrogen and the other is a carbon chain. Hydrophilic and polar. Aldosterone, released from the adrenal gland. This hormone acts on the distal tubules to cause the reabsorption of more non-water. This increases blood volume and pressure. Allantois, transports waste products in mammals to the placenta. Later it is incorporated into the umbilical cord. Allele, a variant of a gene for a particular character. Alternation of generations. Plant life cycle, so named because during the cycle, plants sometimes exist as a diploid organism and at other times as a haploid organism. Altruistic behavior, behavior pattern that reduces the overall fitness of one organism while increasing the fitness of another. Alveoli, functional unit of the lung where a gas exchange occurs. Amines, compounds containing amino groups. Amino acid, a compound with a carbon center surrounded by an amino group, a carboxyl group, a hydrogen, and an R group that provides an amino acid's unique chemical characteristics. Amino group, a functional group that contains NH2 and that acts as a base. An example is an amino acid. Aminoacyl tRNA synthetase, enzyme that makes sure that each tRNA molecule picks up the appropriate amino acid for its anticodon. Amnion, structure formed from epiblast that encloses the fluid-filled cavity that helps cushion the developing embryo. Amygdala, the portion of the human brain that controls impulsive emotions and anger. Amylase, enzyme that breaks down the starches in the human diet to simpler sugars such as maltose, which are fully digested farther down in the intestines. Anaerobic respiration, energy-producing reactions, known as fermentation, that do not involve oxygen. It begins with glycolysis and concludes with the formation of NAD. Anemia, illness in which a lack of iron causes red blood cells to have a diminished capacity for delivering oxygen. Aneuploidy, the condition of having an abnormal number of chromosomes. Angiosperm, flowering plant divided into monocots and dicots, monocotyledons and dicotyledons. Anion, ion with a negative charge that contains more electrons than protons. Anterior pituitary gland, structure that produces 6 hormones: TSH, STH, or HGH, ACTH, LH, FSH, and prolactin. Anther, pollen-producing portion of a plant. Antheridia, male gametangia in bryophytes and ferns designed to produce flagellated sperm that swim to meet up with the eggs produced by the female gametangia. Anticodon, region present at a tRNA attachment site, a 3-nucleotide sequence that is perfectly complementary to a particular codon. Antigen, a molecule that is foreign to our bodies and causes our immune systems to respond. Apical meristem, region at the tips of roots and shoots where plant growth is concentrated and many actively dividing cells can be found. Apoplast pathway, movement of water and nutrients through the non-living portion of cells. Aposematic coloration, warning coloration adopted by animals that possess a chemical defense mechanism. Archaebacteria, one of two major prokaryotic evolutionary branches. These organisms tend to live in extreme environments and include halophils, methanogens, and thermoacidophiles. Archegonium, female gametangia in bryophytes, ferns, and gymnosperms. Archezoa, eukaryotic organism that allegedly most closely resembles prokaryotes. Arteries, structures that carry blood away from the heart. Artificial selection, when humans become the agents of natural selection, breeding of dogs. Ascospores, haploid meiotic products produced by certain fungi. Associative learning, process by which animals take one stimulus and associate it with another. Atom, the smallest form of an element that still displays its unique properties. ATP synthase, enzyme that uses the flow of hydrogens to drive the phosphorylation of an adenosine diphosphate molecule to produce adenosine triphosphate. Auditory communication, communication that involves the use of sound in the conveying of a message. Autosomal chromosome, one that is not directly involved in determining gender. Autotroph, an organism that is self-nourishing. It obtains carbon and energy without ingesting other organisms. Auxin, plant hormone that leads to elongation of stems and plays a role in phototropism and gravitropism. Axon, a longer extension that leaves a neuron and carries the impulse away from the cell body toward target cells. Balanced polymorphism, when there are two or more phenotypic variants maintained in a population. Bare rock succession, the attachment of lichen to rocks, followed by the step-by-step arrival of replacement species. Bar bodies, inactivated genes on X chromosomes. Batesian mimicry, an animal that is harmless copies the appearance of an animal that is dangerous as a defense mechanism to make predators think twice about attacking. Behavioral ecology, science that studies the interaction between animals and their environments from an evolutionary perspective. Bile salts, help to mechanically digest fat by emulsifying it into small droplets contained in water. Binary fission, mechanism by which prokaryotic cells divide. The cell elongates and pinches into two new daughter cells. Binomial system of classification, system created by Linnaeus in which each species is given a two-word name, genus species, e.g., Homo sapiens. Biogeochemical cycles, cycles that represent the movement of elements, such as nitrogen and carbon, from organisms to the environment and back in a continuous cycle. Biomass pyramid, biomass represents the cumulative weight of all of the members at a given trophic level. Biome, the various geographic regions of the Earth that serve as hosts for ecosystems. Biosphere, the entire life-containing area of a planet. All the ecosystems and communities. Biotic components, living organisms of an ecosystem. Biotic potential, the maximum growth rate for a population given unlimited resources, unlimited space, and lack of competition or predators. Birth rate, offspring produced for a specific time period. Bivalves, mollusks with hinged shells such as oysters and clams. Blastula, as a marula undergoes its next round of cell divisions, fluid fills its center to create this hollow-looking structure. Bottleneck, a dramatic reduction in population size that increases the likelihood of genetic drift. Bronchi, tunnels that branch off the trachea that lead into the individual lungs and divide into smaller branches called bronchioles. Bronchioles, tiny lung tunnels that branch repeatedly until they conclude as tiny air pockets containing alveoli. Brush border, large numbers of microvilli that increase the surface area of the small intestine to improve absorption efficiency. Bryophytes, the first land plants to evolve from the chlorophytes. Members of this group include mosses, liverworts, and hornworts. Bundle sheath cells, cells that are tightly wrapped around the veins of a leaf. They are the site for the Calvin cycle in C4 plants. C4 photosynthesis, photosynthetic process that alters the way in which carbon is fixed to better deal with the lack of CO2 that comes from the closing of the stomata in hot, dry regions. C4 plant that has adapted its photosynthetic process to more efficiently handle hot and dry conditions. Calvin cycle, a name for the light-independent dark reactions of photosynthesis. Capsid, a protein shell that surrounds genetic material. Carbon cycle, the movement of carbon from the atmosphere to living organisms and back to the environment in a continuous cycle. Carbon fixation, the attachment of the carbon from CO2 to a molecule that is able to enter the Calvin cycle, assisted by Rubisco. Carboxyl group, an acidic functional group, COOH. This functional group shows up along with amino groups in amino acids. Cardiac muscle, involuntary muscle of the heart that is striated in appearance and contains multiple nuclei. Carnivore, a consumer that obtains energy and nutrients through consumption of other animals. Carotenoid, a photosynthetic pigment, carrying capacity, the maximum number of individuals a population can sustain in a given environment. Casparian strip, obstacle that blocks the passage of water through the endodermis of plants. Catalase, enzyme that assists in the conversion of hydrogen peroxide to water and oxygen. Found in peroxisomes. Catalysts, molecules that speed up reactions by lowering the activation energy of a reaction. Cation, ion with a positive charge that contains more protons than electrons. Cell body, the main body of the neuron. Cell-mediated immunity. This type of immunity involves direct cellular response to invasion as opposed to antibody-based defense. Cell plate plant, cell structure constructed in the Golgi apparatus composed of vesicles that fuse together along the middle of the cell, completing the separation process. Cell wall, wall that functions to shape and protect cells. Present in plant but not animal cells. Cellular slime molds, protists with a unique eating strategy. When plenty of food is available, they eat alone. When food is scarce, they clump together and form a unit. Cellulose, polysaccharide composed of glucose used by plants to form cell walls. Central nervous system, CNS. The CNS is made up of the brain and the spinal cord. The CNS controls skeletal muscles and voluntary movement. Cephalization, the concentration of sensory machinery in the anterior end of a bilateral organism. Cerebellum, portion of brain in charge of coordination and balance. Cerebrum, portion of the brain that controls functions such as speech, hearing, sight, and motor control. Divided into 2 hemispheres and 4 lobes per hemisphere. Cervix, the uterus connects to the vaginal opening via this narrowed region. Cf. Cystic fibrosis. Character, a heritable feature, such as flower color, that varies among individuals. Checkpoints, stop points throughout the cell cycle where the cell verifies that there are enough nutrients and raw materials to progress to the next stage of the cycle. Chemical communication. Mammals and insects communicate through the use of chemical signals called pheromones. Chemoautotrophs, autotrophs that produce energy through oxidation of inorganic substances. Chitin, polysaccharide that is an important part of the exoskeletons of arthropods such as insects, spiders, and shellfish. Chlorophyll, a photosynthetic pigment. Chlorophytes, green algae that are probably the common ancestors of land plants. Chloroplast, the site of photosynthesis and energy production in plant cells and algae. Choanoflagellate, accepted to be the common ancestor of the animal kingdom. Chromosome duplication, error in chromosomal replication that results in the repetition of a genetic segment. Choice chamber, chamber used in scientific experiments to study kinesis. Choice refers to the selection of mates by one sex. In mammals, it is usually females who exercise choice over males. Cholesterol, steroid that is an important structural component of cell membranes and serves as a precursor molecule for steroid sex hormones. Chorion, formed from the trophoblast, it is the outer membrane of the embryo and the site of implantation onto the endometrium. It contributes to formation of the placenta in mammals. Chromatin, the raw material that gives rise to the chromosomes. Genetic material is uncoiled. Chromosomal translocations, condition in which a piece of one chromosome is attached to another, non-homologous chromosome. Chromosome inversion, condition in which a piece of a chromosome separates and reattaches in the opposite direction. Chronic myelogenous leukemia, a cancer affecting white blood cell precursor cells. In this disease, a portion of chromosome 22 has been swapped with a piece of chromosome 9. Chymotrypsin, enzyme that cuts protein bonds in the small intestine. Cilia, structures that beat in rhythmical waves to carry foreign particles and mucus away from the lungs. Circadian rhythm, a physiologic cycle that occurs in time increments that are roughly equivalent to the length of a day. Class II histocompatibility, antigens found on the surface of the immune cells of the body. These antigens play a role in the interaction between the cells of the immune system. Classical conditioning, type of associative learning that Ivan Pavlov demonstrated with his experiments involving salivation in dogs. Cleavage divisions, developing embryo divides. Cytoplasm is distributed unevenly to the daughter cells while the genetic information is distributed equally. Cleavage furrow, groove formed in animal cells between the two daughter cells. This groove pinches together to complete the separation of the two cells after mitosis. Climax community, final stable stage at the completion of a succession cycle. Clump dispersion, scenario in which individuals live in packs that are spaced out from each other. Codominance, both alleles express themselves fully in a heterozygous organism. Codon, a triplet of nucleotides that codes for a particular amino acid. Coefficient of relatedness, statistic that represents the average proportion of genes that two individuals have in common. Coelom, fluid-filled body cavity found between the body wall and the gut that has a lining and is derived from the mesoderm. Coelommates, animals that contain a true coelom. Coenocytic fungi, fungi that do not contain septae. Coevolution, the mutual evolution between two species, which is exemplified by predator-prey relationships. Coleoptile, protective structure found around a grass seedling. Parenchyma cells, live plant cells that provide flexible and mechanical support. Commensalism, one organism benefits from the relationship while the other is unaffected. Community, a collection of populations of species in a given geographic area. Competent, describes a cell that is ready to accept foreign DNA from the environment. Competition, both species involved are harmed by this kind of interaction. The two major forms of competition are interspecific and interspecific competition. Competitive inhibition, condition in which an inhibitor molecule resembling the substrate binds to the active site and physically blocks the substrate from attaching. Complement, a protein that coats cells that need to be cleared, stimulating phagocytes to ingest them. Compounds, two or more elements combine to form an entity. Conduction, process by which heat moves from a place of higher temperature to a place of lower temperature. Conifers, gymnosperm plants whose reproductive structure is a cone. Conjugation, the transfer of DNA between two bacterial cells connected by appendages called sex pili. Convection, heat transfer caused by airflow. Convergent characters, characters are convergent if they look the same in two species even though the species do not share a common ancestor. Convergent evolution, Two unrelated species evolve in a way that makes them more similar. They both respond the same way to some environmental challenge, bringing them closer together. Core cambium, area that produces a thick cover for stems and roots. It produces tissue that replaces dried up epidermis lost during secondary growth. Cork cells, cells produced by the core cambium that die and form a protective barrier against infection and physical damage. Corpus callosum, bridge that connects the two hemispheres of the brain. Cortex, outer region of the kidney or adrenal gland. Cortisol, stress hormone released in response to physiological challenges. Cotyledon, structure that provides nutrients for a developing angiosperm plant. Cre-Duchat syndrome. This syndrome occurs with a deletion in chromosome 5 that leads to mental retardation, unusual facial features, and a small head. Most die in infancy or early childhood. Cryptic coloration. Those being hunted adopt a coloring scheme that allows them to blend into the colors of the environment. Cuticle, waxy covering that protects terrestrial plants against water loss. Cutin, waxy coat that protects plants. Cyclic light reactions, pathway that produces only ATP and uses only photosystem I. Cyclin, protein that accumulates during interphase, vital to cell cycle control. Cytokinesis, the physical separation of the newly formed daughter cells during meiosis and mitosis. Occurs immediately after telophase. Cytokinin, plant hormone that promotes cell division and leaf enlargement, and slows down the aging of leaves. Cytoskeleton, provides support, shape, and mobility to cells. Death rate, number of deaths per time period. Decomposer, see detritive or dehydration reaction, a reaction in which two compounds merge, releasing H2O as a product. Deletion, a piece of the chromosome is lost in the developmental process. Demographers, scientists who study the theory and statistics behind population growth and decline. Dendrite, one of many short-branched processes of a neuron that help send the nerve impulses toward the cell body. Denitrification, the process by which bacteria use nitrates and release N2 as a product. Density-independent limiting factors, factors that limit population growth that have nothing to do with the population size, such as natural disasters and weather. Depolarization, the electric potential becomes less negative inside the cell, allowing an action potential to occur. Desert, the driest land biome on Earth, which experiences a wide range of temperatures from day to night and exists on nearly every continent. Detritivore, also known as decomposer, a consumer that obtains its energy through the consumption of dead animals and plants. Dicot, dicotyledon, an angiosperm plant that has two cotyledons. Dihybrid cross, the crossing of two different characters BBRR. A dihybrid cross between heterozygous gametes gives a 9:3, 3:1 phenotype ratio in the offspring. Diploid, 2N, an organism that has two copies of each type of chromosome. In humans, this refers to the pairs of homologous chromosomes. Diplomonids, a phylum that is associated with the archezoan eukaryotes. Directional selection occurs when members of a population at one end of a spectrum are selected against and/or those at the other end are selected for. Disaccharide, a sugar consisting of two monosaccharides bound together. Common disaccharides include sucrose, maltose, and lactose. Dispersive DNA replication, a theory that suggests that every daughter strand contains some parental DNA, but it is dispersed among pieces of DNA not of parental origin. Disruptive selection. Selection is disruptive when individuals at the two extremes of a spectrum of variation do better than the more common forms in the middle. Distribution describes the way populations are dispersed over a geographic area. Divergent evolution. Two related species evolve in a way that makes them less similar, sometimes causing speciation. Division, the classification category that replaces the phylum in plant classification. DNA methylation, the addition of CH3 groups to the bases of DNA, rendering DNA inactive. DNA polymerase, the main enzyme in DNA replication that attaches to primer proteins and adds nucleotides to the growing DNA chain in a 5-to-3 direction. Dominance hierarchy, a ranking of power among the members of a group of individuals. Double helix, the shape of DNA. Two strands held together by hydrogen bonds. Ecosystem, all the individuals of a community and the environment in which it exists. Ectoderm, outer germ layer that gives rise to the nervous system, skin, hair, and nails. Ectothermic animal, animal whose basic metabolic rates increase in response to increases in temperature. Edwards syndrome, the presence of trisomy 18, which occurs in 1 out of every 10,000 live births and affects almost every organ of the body. Element, the simplest form of matter. Embryology, the study of embryonic development. Emigration rate, rate at which individuals relocate out of a given population. Endergonic reaction, a reaction that requires input of energy to occur. AB energy C. Endocytosis, process by which substances are brought into cells by enclosure into a membrane-created vesicle that surrounds the substance and escorts it into the cell. Endoderm, inner germ layer that gives rise to the inner lining of the gut, digestive system, liver, thyroid, lungs, and bladder. Endodermis, cells that line the innermost layer of the cortex in plants that give rise to the Casparian strip. Endometrium, inner wall of the uterus to which the embryo attaches. Endopeptidases, enzymes that initiate the digestion of proteins by hydrolyzing all the polypeptides into small amino acid groups. Endosymbiotic theory proposes that groups of prokaryotes associated in symbiotic relationships to form eukaryotes, mitochondria, and chloroplasts. Endothermic animal, animal whose body temperature is relatively unaffected by external temperature. Enhancer, DNA region, also known as a regulator, that is located thousands of bases away from the promoter that influences transcription by interacting with specific transcription factors. Epiblast, develops into the 3 germ layers of the embryo, the endoderm, the mesoderm, and the ectoderm. Epidermis, plants, the protective outer coating of plants. Epididymis, the coiled region that extends from the testes. This is where the sperm completes its maturation and waits until it is called on to do its duty. Episomes, plasmids that can be incorporated into a bacterial chromosome. Epistasis, a gene at one locus alters the phenotypic expression of a gene at another locus. A dihybrid cross involving epistatic genes produces a 9:4:3 phenotype ratio. Esophageal sphincter, valve-like trapdoor between the esophagus and the stomach. Esophagus, structure that connects the throat to the stomach. Estrogen, hormone made, secreted, in ovaries that stimulates development of sex characteristics in women and induces the release of luteinizing hormone LH before the LH surge, etc. See electron transport chain. Ethology, the study of animal behavior. Ethylene, plant hormone that initiates the ripening of fruit and the dropping of leaves and flowers from trees. Eubacteria, one of 2 major prokaryotic evolutionary branches, categorized according to their mode of nutritional acquisition, mechanism of movement, shape, and other characteristics. Evaporation, process by which a liquid changes into a vapor form. Functions in thermoregulation for humans when water leaves our bodies in the form of water vapor, sweat. Evolution, descent with modification. Evolution happens to populations, not individuals, and describes change in allele frequencies in populations with time. Excision repair, repair mechanism for DNA replication in which a section of DNA containing an error is cut out and the gap is filled by DNA polymerase. Exergonic reaction, a reaction that gives off energy as a product. AB energy C. Exocytosis, process by which substances are exported out of the cell. A vesicle escorts the substance to the plasma membrane, fuses with the membrane, and ejects its contents out of the cell. Exons, coding regions produced during transcription that are glued back together to produce the mRNA that is translated into a protein. Exopeptidases, enzymes that complete the digestion of proteins by hydrolyzing all the amino acids of any remaining fragments. Exponential growth, a population grows at a rate that creates a J-shaped curve. Extreme halophils, archaebacteria that live in environments with high salt concentrations. F-plasmid, plasmid that contains the genes necessary for the production of a sex pilus. F1, the first generation of offspring, or the first filial generation in a genetic cross. F2, the second generation of offspring, or the second filial generation in a genetic cross. Facultative anaerobe, organisms that can survive in oxygen-rich or oxygen-free environments. Fallopian tube, oviduct, fats, lipids, made by combining glycerol and fatty acids, used as long-term energy stores in cells. They can be saturated or unsaturated. Fatty acid, long carbon chain that contains a carboxyl group on one end that combines with glycerol molecules to form lipids. Fermentation, anaerobic respiration pathway that occurs in absence of oxygen, produces less ATP than aerobic respiration. Ferredoxin, molecule that donates the electrons to NADP to produce NADPH during the light reactions of photosynthesis. Fibrous root system found in monocots that provides the plant with a very strong anchor without going very deep into the soil. Filtration, capillaries allow small particles through the pores of their endothelial linings, but large molecules such as proteins, platelets, and blood cells tend to remain in the vessel. Fixed action pattern, an innate behavior that seems to be programmed response to some stimulus. Florigen, hormone thought to assist in the blooming of flowers. Fluid mosaic model that states that the membrane is made of a phospholipid bilayer with proteins of various lengths and sizes, interspersed with cholesterol. Food chain, a hierarchical list of who snacks on who. For example, bugs are eaten by spiders, who are eaten by birds, who are eaten by cats. Food web can be regarded as overlapping food chains that show all the various dietary relationships in an environment.